My name is Megan Walsh, and I was 29 years old when my parents emptied my inheritance to pay for my sister's dream wedding and then called me laughing to say thank you. I remember exactly where I was standing when my phone lit up with my mother's name. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I was in the break room at work, heating up leftovers in the microwave. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. I had no reason to think that the call I was about to answer would completely rearrange everything I understood about my family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand who I was before that call, and who my family was, because none of what happened makes sense without that context. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the second of two daughters. My sister is 4 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to notice things, I noticed the difference in how we were treated. My sister was loud and bright, and the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into. She was the one my parents brought to dinner parties and bragged about to the neighbors. She was the one my mother called first with good news, the one my father introduced to his colleagues with a full biography. She won homecoming queen her senior year of high school, and my parents still have the photo on the mantle. I was quieter. I was the one who stayed home on Friday nights studying, the one who got a partial scholarship to Ohio State while my sister's tuition was paid in full, no questions asked. I was the one who graduated without a party, moved into a studio apartment, and started paying back my own student loans while working entry-level data jobs. I loved my family. I want to make that clear. I didn't resent my sister. Not really. Not in the way that poisons you. I just understood, early, that the way my parents loved us was not the same. When I was 24, my grandmother died. She was my father's mother, a retired school teacher from rural Indiana who had lived carefully and saved quietly her whole life. She never owned much, but what she had, she protected. When she passed, she left behind a trust worth just under $90,000. The money was meant for her grandchildren, both of us, but she had structured it specifically so that I would receive my portion at age 30. Her reasoning, according to the estate documents, was that she wanted the money used for something lasting: a house, a business, an education. She didn't want it spent impulsively. My parents were named co-trustees. At the time, that seemed like a formality. My grandmother trusted them. I trusted them. I was 24 and not thinking about money I couldn't touch for 6 years. I signed the acknowledgement forms the estate attorney mailed me, filed them in a folder, and went back to my life. The years passed. I got promoted twice. I moved into a better apartment. I kept a close eye on my own finances, contributed to my 401k, built up a small emergency fund. I didn't think much about the trust because there was nothing to think about yet. Every so often, my father would mention it, usually when I talked about saving up for a down payment on a condo, and he'd say, "Don't worry, Meg. You've got that coming to you." I'd smile and nod and go back to my spreadsheets. My sister met her fiancé when she was 31. His name was Derek, and he was perfectly nice, and within about 6 months of their first date, my mother had decided this was the most important event in the history of our family. The engagement party alone cost more than my monthly rent. I heard my parents talking once, in the kitchen, about venues and catering and photographers, and the numbers they were throwing around made my stomach hurt a little. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my place. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no idea about, was that somewhere around 8 months before the wedding, my parents ran out of money. They had committed to things they couldn't actually afford: the venue deposit, the caterer, the florist, the destination engagement shoot in Charleston. My sister had a very specific vision, and my parents, as they always had, said yes to everything. When the gap between what they'd promised and what they had became impossible to ignore, they made a decision. They didn't take out a loan. They didn't ask my sister and Derek to scale back. They didn't call me to have a conversation. They went into the trust. The transfer happened quietly, in 2 installments, about 7 months before I turned 30. The first was for $40,000. The second, 3 weeks later, was for the remaining balance, just under $44,000. In less than a month, $84,000 that my grandmother had saved across a lifetime of careful living was gone. Used for table centerpieces and a DJ, and a 5-course dinner for 200 people. I found out by accident. About 4 months before my 30th birthday, I got a letter from the bank. It was addressed to me as a beneficiary of the trust account. It was a standard year-end statement. I almost threw it away without opening it, but something made me pause. Maybe it was the fact that I'd been loosely tracking when I'd be able to access the funds, thinking about the condo, imagining what it would feel like to have a real down payment. I opened it. The balance was $612. I read that number 3 times. I turned the statement over, thinking I had misread something, thinking the page was incomplete. But it wasn't. The account history showed 2 large withdrawals in the previous spring. No explanation. No corresponding deposits, just gone. I sat down on my kitchen floor and I stayed there for a long time. Here is the thing about discovering that someone you love has done something unforgivable. The first feeling is not anger. The first feeling is something quieter and much worse. It's the feeling of a floor disappearing under you. It's the feeling of reaching for a wall and finding air. I sat on my kitchen floor, and I went very still, because some part of me already understood what had happened before my brain had finished catching up. I did not call my parents that night. I did not call my sister. What I did was call an estate attorney. Her name was Carol Yates, and I found her through a referral from a colleague who had dealt with a complicated probate situation the previous year. I called her the morning after I found the statement, before I went to work, sitting in my car in the parking garage. I told her what I had found. She asked me to email her the statement and any other trust documents I had. By the end of that day, she had confirmed what I already suspected. The withdrawals were unauthorized. As a beneficiary, I had rights. As co-trustees, my parents had obligations, specific, legally enforceable obligations that they had violated. Carol was calm and methodical in a way that I found deeply steadying. She explained that what my parents had done constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. She explained what that meant in practical terms. She explained what remedies existed and what a court would likely think of the situation. She did not tell me what to do. She laid out the landscape and let me decide where to walk. I decided to wait, not out of cowardice, not out of the same exhausted people-pleasing that had made me quiet my whole life. I decided to wait because Carol told me that acting too soon, before we had fully documented everything, could limit my options. And because, I'll be honest, I wanted to understand the full shape of it first. I needed to know exactly what had been done before I decided how to respond. So, I went to family dinners. I watched my mother flip through wedding magazine samples on her iPad. I listened to my sister talk about her dress alterations and her honeymoon suite in the Maldives. I smiled at the right moments. I hugged people when it was expected, and I said nothing. Meanwhile, Carol and I were working. She subpoenaed the full trust account records. We documented every transaction. We gathered the original trust documents, my grandmother's will, the letter of instruction she had written to the trustees. We built a file that was thorough and quiet and airtight. Carol filed the initial legal paperwork 4 weeks before the wedding. My parents were served quietly, by mail, while they were still deep in final preparations. They didn't tell my sister. I don't think they fully understood, at that point, what was coming. The wedding was on a Saturday in September. It was held at a renovated farmhouse venue about 40 minutes outside Columbus. String lights everywhere, long wooden tables, a string quartet for the ceremony. Beautiful, honestly. My grandmother would have thought it was obscene. I wore a green dress and I stood in the receiving line and I hugged my sister and told her she looked stunning. Which was true. She did. The reception was in full swing when my mother found me at the edge of the dance floor. She had had 2 glasses of champagne, and she was flushed and emotional in the way she got at big events, when everything she wanted was happening at once. She put her hand on my arm and leaned in close. "Isn't it perfect?" she said. "Isn't it everything she always wanted?" "It really is," I said. My mother squeezed my arm. "You know, we could not have done this without you." I looked at her. I kept my face very still. "We used part of the trust," she said. "For the wedding. I know we should have talked to you first, but we were in such a bind, and you were always so practical about money, and we figured you have a good job, Meg. You'll be fine. And it was such a small thing compared to what this day means for your sister." She was watching me, waiting for me to nod, To say, of course. To smooth it over the way I always had. Dad knows? I said. It was his idea, actually. She waved her hand. It's all fine. You'll be 30 soon anyway. We just moved things up a little. I nodded. Not because I was agreeing. Because I was done. 3 days after the wedding, the full legal process kicked into motion in a way my parents could no longer ignore. Carol had timed everything carefully. We didn't want the service of the more formal documents to interfere with the wedding itself, partly for logistical reasons and partly, if I'm honest, because I didn't want a scene at my sister's reception. What I wanted was something colder and more complete. My parents received a formal notice of civil litigation the following Tuesday. The suit alleged breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of trust funds, and conversion. Carol had also filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding potential elder financial abuse. My grandmother's trust had been established with specific restrictions, and violating those restrictions while the beneficiary was a living adult had implications beyond just the civil suit. My father called me that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. My mother called 4 minutes later. I let that go to voicemail too. My sister called that evening. I picked up. She was confused, then upset, then somewhere between furious and devastated. She didn't understand, she said. Her voice cracked when she said that, and I believed her. I still believe her. She was not part of the decision. She was just the reason for it. Meg, she said, you can't sue Mom and Dad. I'm not asking for your permission, I said. I'm telling you what's happening so you hear it from me. But the wedding already happened, I said. That's not reversible. This is about what comes next. She went quiet for a long moment. How long have you known? About 4 months. I heard her breath catch. You knew at the wedding. Yes. And she stopped. How could you just stand there and not say anything? Because I'd already done something, I said. I didn't need to make a scene. It was already handled. The litigation took 7 months to resolve. My parents, on the advice of their own attorney, chose not to contest the core facts. The withdrawals were documented, the trust language was clear, and there was no legitimate defense for what they had done. The settlement required full restitution of the $84,000, drawn from a combination of their retirement accounts and a home equity line. There were penalties on top of the principal. There was also a structured repayment plan that Carol had negotiated carefully, because I had told her I didn't want to destroy my parents financially. I wanted them to understand consequences. Carol also negotiated something else. At my request, a formal written acknowledgement, signed by both of my parents, that the funds had been misappropriated from my trust without my knowledge or consent, and that the responsibility for the wedding costs lay with them, not with me. I wanted that in writing. I wanted it to exist somewhere official and permanent, a document that could not be revised by memory or by the slow revisionism of family mythology. There are things I want to tell you, now that the facts are laid out. I want to tell you that I did not enjoy this. That is not entirely true, and if I said it was entirely true, you would probably see through it. There was a moment, more than one moment, actually, when I felt something I can only describe as a clean, cold satisfaction. Not cruelty, not pleasure in other people's pain, but the specific satisfaction of having been underestimated, quietly, for your entire life, and then proving, in the most documented and irrefutable way possible, that you had been paying close attention all along. My grandmother had trusted me with something. My parents had treated that trust as a resource available to them, a fund they could dip into because I was the practical one, the low-maintenance one, the one who would be fine. They were not wrong that I would be fine, but they were wrong that being fine meant being available for that kind of use. My sister and I did not speak for 6 months after the settlement. When we started talking again, it was slowly and carefully, like two people learning to walk on new ground after an earthquake. She told me that she had tried to be angry with me and had found that she couldn't sustain it. I told her that I had never been angry with her. That was true. She told me that she had paid back my parents some of the money, not all of it, but some because she said she needed to be able to look at herself in the mirror. I told her that was between her and them. My parents and I have a relationship now that is civil and bounded. We see each other at holidays. We don't talk about what happened, not directly, though I think about it every time I sit at their dining room table and look at the photo of my sister on the mantel. The wedding photo is there now too, in a silver frame. She looks beautiful in it. She really does. I bought my condo last year. 2 bedrooms, 3rd floor, southwest corner unit, morning light all through the kitchen. I put 20% down. I picked out the paint colors myself, and I assembled most of the furniture myself, and I stood in the middle of my living room the first night I slept there, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Like everything in that room was mine. Not borrowed, not on loan, not conditional on someone else's approval, or good judgment, or follow-through. Mine. I have thought about my grandmother a lot since all of this. She was a careful woman, careful in the way that people who grew up without much tend to be careful, where careful isn't about being afraid but about paying attention. She saved that money over decades. She specified, in writing, exactly how it should be used and when. She named trustees she trusted. I think about what she would say if she knew. I think she would not be surprised. Exactly. I think she would nod slowly, the way she did when she was digesting something she'd already half expected. And then I think she would say something like, "Well, you handled it, didn't you?" I did. Something I want to say to anyone who finds themselves in a situation like mine. The most powerful thing I did was not file the lawsuit. The most powerful thing I did was stay quiet for 4 months while I prepared. Every instinct I had wanted to call my parents the night I found the bank statement. Every instinct wanted to confront, to demand an explanation, to have the conversation that might have felt satisfying in the moment and accomplished almost nothing lasting. Instead, I found a lawyer. I gathered documents. I learned my rights. I let the situation mature until I fully understood its shape. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes, silence is what you do while you're building something. I have a colleague who asked me once, after I'd told her a version of this story, whether I regretted not having confronted my parents earlier, whether those 4 months of family dinners and wedding planning felt like a betrayal of myself, going through the motions when I knew what I knew. I thought about it for a real moment before I answered. No, I told her. Because those 4 months weren't performance. They were patience. There's a difference. And I knew it the whole time. I was not pretending everything was fine. I was waiting for everything to be handled. There is nothing dishonest about keeping your cards close until the table is set. The people who took from me, who looked at what my grandmother built and saw something they could use for centerpieces and champagne, had spent years reading me as someone who wouldn't push back, someone who would absorb and adjust and find a way to be fine. They were right about the last part. I always find a way to be fine. They were wrong about what that costs. I kept a copy of the settlement agreement in the same folder as my original trust acknowledgement forms. The folder sits in the top drawer of my desk, behind the folders for my mortgage and my insurance and my investment accounts. I don't open it often, but every now and then, when I have a day that makes me feel small or overlooked or invisible, I remember it's there. I remember the look on my father's face when his attorney told him the documentation was complete and the case was closed and the transfer schedule was set. I remember my mother's voice on a voicemail she left me during the litigation, her tone somewhere between pleading and accusatory, saying, "We're your family, Megan. This isn't how families handle things." And I think, I know what my family needed me to be, and I know who I actually am. Those two things are not the same. They were never the same. I spent a long time trying to make them fit. I'm done trying to make them fit. My name is Megan Walsh. I am 30 years old. I have a condo with morning light in the kitchen, and a down payment I earned, and a grandmother who knew, somehow, before she died, that the practical quiet one was the one worth protecting. She was right.